Marvel's multiverse has been a witness to many world-changing events: Thanos and his quest for power, the Nova Corps, and more. But what at first seemed like a benevolent extraterrestrial parasite is now going to prove itself to be older than existence itself. According to the lore, this is the seventh creation, the seventh cosmos. But even before this multiverse existed, there was something slumbering in the depths of the darkness. And that something is what Eddie Brock is confronting right now in The Last Dance. So without further ado, let's dive into the story and explore this very real Thanos-level threat. Oh, and if you like the video, please hit the like and subscribe button. 2 of those small clicks will help us in marvelous ways to bring you these long reads. Now, let's begin. Venom Vol 4 Number 4, The Awakening That Brought the Warning. S.H.I.E.L.D. hasn't always been the benevolent organization that everyone thinks it to be. Like every secret organization, S.H.I.E.L.D. has its own dark past. And a former Vietnam War veteran named Rex Strickland is proof of that. Or in fact, was proof of that. You see, during the Vietnam War, Nick Fury needed something desperately to turn the tide of war. And when he found the ancestors of the symbiotes in an archaeological digging site, he thought he had struck gold. The plan was to bond the symbiotes with willing soldiers that will be able to wield them and win the war. But this was Fury's first encounter with the symbiotes, and as we have come to know, things did not go according to plan. Rex Strickland was among one of the soldiers that was chosen to be a part of the secretive program. Rex was bonded with a symbiote that came to be known as Tyrannosaurus. When these soldiers were deployed in the war, their symbiotes ended up lashing out. They killed everyone in sight. For 4 months, Rex and his comrades would wake up from a catatonic state only to realize that they were surrounded by dead bodies as a result of what their symbiotes had done. Every time they would wake up, their symbiotes would be screaming obscenities at them in an eldritch language, something these soldiers were never able to understand. As a last resort, a life model decoy of Nick Fury and Logan were dispatched to subdue these soldiers. However, upon their arrival, Rex's symbiote, Tyrannosaurus, disbonded from his body and acted as a decoy himself to catch Nick Fury and Logan off guard. However, through some miracle, Rex was able to alert them of the symbiote's presence. He even managed to help Logan by separating the symbiote from his body once it had taken over. Life model decoys, or LMDs as S.H.I.E.L.D. likes to call them, have the capability of self-destructing in case something goes wrong. This is exactly what Nick Fury utilized, realizing that things had gotten out of hand. However, this is when Tyrannosaurus, Rex's symbiote, had a change of heart. The symbiote was now regretting its own actions, and so in order to save Rex and Logan, the symbiote rebonded to Rex and threw Logan to safety. However, the explosion was too intense even for the symbiote. Tyrannosaurus was seared off of Rex's body, and Rex was lost to the fire. However, this wasn't the end of him. Rex's consciousness was stored in the symbiote hive mind. This allowed Tyrannosaurus to assume Rex's identity. Now, posing as Rex, the symbiote learned to respect and appreciate what the hive mind would call as the light. What the hive mind termed as the light was an amalgamation of values such as honesty, nobility, as well as the physical construct known as light itself. And so, with a new appreciation for Rex and his light, years later, Tyrannosaurus would try to free his comrades from the ancient symbiotes that they had once bonded with. But he will need help in doing so, and help will come in the form of Eddie Brock and Miles Morales. But when Eddie and Miles went to rescue Rex's former teammates, they found that they had been consumed by their former symbiotes. Not only that, the symbiotes had unleashed the Grendel upon the world once again. The Grendel was an ancient symbiote, a massive klyntar dragon, and a few days ago, this dragon was wreaking havoc in downtown Manhattan. And when Eddie had confronted this dragon along with Miles, he had found something ancient lying underneath. At first, it had seemed that they won when Miles had used his venom blast to tear open the symbiote. However, the black goo had quickly enveloped them, and what they had found inside was much more than they had bargained for. They hadn't found a monster. No, that would have been too easy. What they had found was something that had existed before time and space itself. Something that was there when even creation had never existed. What they had found was an ancient god, and that ancient god right now has Eddie up by his throat. In the beginning, There was nothing, and then there was war. I was woken up to war. The ancient god that Eddie and Miles had found inside the symbiote is currently showing Eddie visions of the past. We see the god, skinny and scrawny, slumbering in the darkness, unbothered by the void around him. But then, suddenly, he is awoken by a huge explosion of light. This not only wakes him up from his slumber, but also begins to sear his skin. It begins to sting his eyes. This sudden intrusion of light on his domain will not go unpunished. The light of being exploded into my realm. Blinded, I fell for eons in the bright, until inside that light I found something else, gods. As the god of darkness spent an eternity in the light of creation, he was finally confronted by the Celestials once the 7th multiverse had been created. The Celestials, unaware of the god of darkness, were at first intrigued by him. One of them had approached him curiously, but this curiosity was appalling to the god of darkness. To him, the god of darkness that would come to be known as Knull, the Celestials were sinners. What they thought as nothingness, a simple void begging for creation to exist, was to him his entire empire. It was his domain, a place where he had existed, ruled and reigned for millions of years. They banished my abyss further into the deepest corners of their creation. They would come to call my kingdom space, as if it were an empty thing that needed to be filled. Knull's body had come into creation. He had come to exist as a pale and scrawny being with long hair, sunken eyes, and a huge jaw with sharp, jagged teeth. He had come to exist exactly opposite to the domain he ruled. His domain was dark, but he was light. But this contradiction would go unnoticed by Knull for eons, because when he had woken up to the Celestials, he had nothing but revenge and rage on his mind. As the curious Celestial had held Knull in his hand, the god of darkness at first was perplexed by the size of this creature. He had looked around frantically and had found solace in his own shadow, and so Knull had bent down and plunged his hand into it. But my kingdom was not empty. My abyss was not dead, not hollow. The endlessness of my lands was not theirs to raise and reform and remake. No, the void breathes. The abyss has teeth. And when Knull had plunged his hand into his own shadow, he had found the power that he had thought he lost. He had found his darkness. He had found his void. He had found his weapon, the black goo that would come to form his sword. With the sword now in hand, Knull had lunged at the Celestial that had the audacity to hold him. With a single swipe of his blade, Knull had decapitated the Celestial, but this had sentenced him to another eternity of nothingness once again, at the hands of the other Celestials. That was the first time I tasted the blood of the light, and for that crime I was banished. But the gods, they did not know what they had done. The fools had sent me home. They had sent me to my domain, to my void. There, my work began. And in that void, Knull's work did indeed begin. The first symbiote that Knull created started its life as a sword, the same sword that Knull had pulled out of his own shadow and had used it to decapitate the Celestial. He spent the next few centuries crafting and honing this blade in the fire of the decapitated Celestial's head. There, shrouded in my darkness, the god of a forgotten idea became the god of the forge. Knull goes on to tell Eddie that in those early days, his creation, the first symbiote, was unclean. According to him, the symbiote was unrefined, which is why it needed to be perfected. And this is what spent all his time doing, perfecting the blade. To this day, the weaker of my creations carry those scars of their progenitor's birth inside them. They still fear the fire of the forge and the discordant and incessant noise of a celestial hammer beating their will into something wieldy. And this first sword that Knull had crafted would come to be known as the all-black necrosword. And now that his perfect weapon had been crafted, Knull set out to conquer the universe. In his own words, he set out to conquer anything that was bright. It is then that his symbiote armor first started taking form. He fought everyone, from gods to men, and defeated them with the same cruelty, the same darkness. Knull's sword gained a reputation. It came to be known as the Godslayer. Together, me and the Godslayer, we slit the throats of creation and choked 1 billion stars with the blood of the Almighty. This reign of terror continued until finally a god of light was able to stab Knull in the head with his spear. The two of them fell on a planet with a loud explosion, and what remained were two dying gods. But fate had a different future planned for Knull, because while he lay there dying, he saw a man approaching from the fire. Doused in flames, with his face hidden, this man stole Knull's firstborn, the all-black Necrosword. This man would later come to be known as the God Butcher, but according to Knull, this was just a foolish man who sullied the sword's name. He then addresses Eddie directly and says, "Can you imagine, host, a dark god falling from the heavens and giving you a gift you cannot hope to understand? Can you fathom the madness it would bury inside of a mortal heart to hope to wield something like that?" We then see Knull in the present day. He holds Eddie by the throat in the air, while all of them are surrounded by the symbiotic goo. An unconscious Miles is lying on the floor beside them as Knull continues to taunt and show visions to Eddie. Eddie is completely helpless. Blood streams out of his nose as we hear Eddie talk. He seems to be astounded and intoxicated by what Knull is doing to him. The primordial symbiotic goo oozing out of Knull's hand is forcing itself down Eddie's nose and eyes. As we get a closer look at Eddie's eyes, we see that they have turned completely black with swirls of red inside them. It is as though Eddie is experiencing the darkness that Knull reigns over, and the creations in this darkness are made of red. With a raspy yet thick voice, Knull says, shall we continue? Yes. And so, because Eddie wants to see more, and he wants to learn about Knull's past. Knull shows him what happened once the All-Black was stolen from him. He spent 100 years on that planet waiting, looking for another way to conquer the universe, until he finally stumbled upon it. When a new hunger to conquer the bright sparked inside of him, it brought along with it a revelation. I discovered if I bonded my living abyss with lesser creatures, I could then manifest and pilot their new forms as vessels. As Knull is saying this, Eddie is shown visions of him rising back from the dead. Knull simply steps out of the shadows and grabs a small alien creature. The black goo that we have come to know as the symbiote infects the little creature, and it becomes Knull's slave. We then see Knull holding an uninfected creature and comparing it to an infected one. This is when the revelation dawned upon him. I could draw strength from the hosts, glean from them information about my surroundings. This moment, this primordial instance of symbiosis on this near barren land, this is where it all truly began. And so the next panel shows Knull killing off the little creature that was uninfected, while his symbiotic dragons take to the sky. This is when the symbiotes began their life, and they served only one purpose, only one king. Knull. Not only was he their king, but he was also their only mind. The symbiotes operated on a hive mind, and Knull was at the center of it. He created his throne world out of nothingness, and then sent out the symbiotes to conquer the universe. He was able to control his symbiotes from across different galaxies. This allowed him to infect civilizations that were out of his reach. The next few panels show the symbiotic dragons arriving on different planets with different civilizations. No matter their technological level, every civilization succumbed to the symbiotes. With every civilization that was conquered, the darkness was winning and the light was losing. However, that is until the symbiote dragons arrived on Earth. They arrived on Earth in the 6th century CE, and they promptly attacked a Nordic village. Two symbiote dragons had arrived on Earth, one black and one red. Knull had arrived on Earth with the intent of conquering it. He had expected a war, but what he found was men that would hide from war and protect their women and children. He was intrigued. The vision that Eddie is now seeing shows the village men running away from the dragons while hiding in a huge long house. They're screaming for help, praying to someone named Beowulf, but there was no stopping the symbiotes. As the men hold the gate shut, they fail to notice the symbiotic goo oozing in through the crevices. But this is when Knull says that something unexpected happened. I was quite taken with these pathetic creatures, but I was not lured here by the scent of man. No, your planet, it reeked of light. And Knull was right. It wasn't humanity that reeked off light. It was the god that protected them. It was Thor. We then see Thor save the men just before they are taken by the dragons. The god of lightning unleashes the power of thunder on the dragons, and this instantly destroys them. Your thunder god unleashed the power I had never felt before, and in the blink of an eye, he stabbed it like a billion needles into our hearts. We were undone, and we then see as the dragons were destroyed, their connection was severed from Knull. This destruction and Thor's power not only severed Knull's connection to the symbiotes on Earth, but also to all the symbiotes across all the different galaxies that he had managed to conquer. With the hive mind lost and the connection severed, the symbiotes began to find new hosts of their own. Knull now calls these new hosts parasites because, according to him, these parasites infected his children, infected them with their light, with their values of morality and nobility. These infected symbiotes with new hosts then did the unthinkable. They rose in mutiny against Knull. These new symbiotes that we see that rebelled against Knull look just like Eddie's eyes. They are pitch black with red swirls on their faces. We then see these new symbiotes with their new hosts rebel against Knull on their home planet. Billions of these new symbiotes surrounded Knull and then attacked him. As Knull recounts all of this happening in the present day, he says, "Their horrid notions of honor, the lies of nobility and light and life began seeping into the hive. Their infection, their poison, their venom roared into mutiny. Untethered from my control, my children spawned endlessly, and consumed by the abyss of my own creation, I drowned in their darkness." We then see Knull get swallowed by the same dark symbiotic goo that he used to conquer galaxies, the same goo that he had used to create his throne world. In the present day, Knull holds Eddie more menacingly and says that this is what his children did. This is how his children became the klyntar. This is the secret that they hide. Eddie knows that Knull is lying. Venom has told him about klyntar. Venom told him that klyntar used to be a great warrior, but Knull simply laughs in his face. He knows that this story is a lie. He's able to complete the rest of this story for Eddie, and he is able to do this because he has once again bonded with the symbiotes. They are now once again a hive mind, and he can read all the information they possess. This tale of a warrior that Eddie was told is a lie. He knows his children will lie and do anything as long as they can hide their secret. They are liars, they are weak, they are betrayers, but soon I will be free of their klyntar. I don't understand. Free of their klyntar? What does that mean? Klyntar is their race. It's who they are. It's the planet where they come from. Ha ha ha. You are a simple and trusting host, Edward Brock. I see why my child adores you so much, but you have been lied to for so very long. As Knull is saying this, the panel shows a silhouette of Eddie and Knull in nothing but red on black background. This is supposed to signify the dichotomy between them and how Eddie is currently feeling. Surrounded by complete and utter darkness, Eddie exists as nothing but red. We then see the last moments in which the new symbiotes had managed to restrain and capture Knull. Each one of them had swarmed around him and then held onto his body inch by inch. They had continued to swarm around him until there was nothing but dark goo, and they had continued to do so at the center of their throne world. And so once again, Knull was lost to the same dark void that the Celestials had imprisoned him in. In the present day, Knull says, "Do you see the shape of it now? Do you understand? There is no planet of the symbiotes. Klyntar is their word for cage." Knull then goes on to tell Eddie that he is currently imprisoned in the center of klyntar, but thanks to Eddie's actions, he has managed to wake up after eons. And although he is imprisoned there, he is able to pilot this current vessel, the Black Dragon, that the humans call the Grendel, because the hive mind is awake once again. I'm sure it all must be quite overwhelming for you both, you and your symbiote, but all is well, child. Your God is awake, and God is coming. As Knull says this, he fails to notice that Miles has finally started to wake up. Knull then brandishes a vicious smile as he tells Eddie the next part of his plan. This symbiote, the Grendel, was split into parts by S.H.I.E.L.D. He tells Eddie that once he is able to find all the parts, he's going to use the Grendel to free himself from klyntar, and once he has done that, he is going to conquer the universe again, and this time he's going to start with Earth. But before Knull can say more, Miles uses the venom blast and punches him in the face. This destroys the physical form Knull had created for himself using the Grendel symbiote. With a mangled and broken face, Knull continues to taunt Miles, who desperately begs for Eddie to get up. In a last-ditch effort, Miles decides to pry open the black goo surrounding them, but when he looks outside, his eyes widen with shock, because they are not on Earth anymore. They are in space. The symbiote dragon, they call Grendel, is flying high above Earth, with Miles and Eddie trapped inside it. Venom and Miles manage to break free from Grendel's grasp, and Knull decides to let them live. He does not follow them because he has his eyes set on the bigger picture. He wants to conquer the universe, and so he needs to play his cards right. Absolute Carnage, Volume 1, Number 5, The World or Your Son. Since Knull perfected the symbiotes, they were designed to do a lot of things, and one of their purposes was to leave traces of genetic material in their hosts' spines. These are codices. Codices, intended to be used by the Hive Mind and Knull. Cletus Cassidy, aka Carnage, has been resurrected by a group of cultists that worship Knull. Cassidy's sole purpose is to extract the codices that have been left in former symbiote hosts so that he can awaken Knull and call him to Earth. Carnage has been gathering these codices through brutal means, and the only one standing in his way is Venom. When Eddie Brock learned about Carnage's return and that he had been extracting the codices from former symbiote hosts, he reluctantly partnered with the Maker. The Maker, aka an evil Reed Richards from a parallel universe. With the help of the Maker, Eddie developed a machine that could extract the codices from former symbiote hosts and destroy them. Sadly, despite this valiant effort, time wasn't on their side. After brutally murdering several of the past symbiote hosts, Carnage grew too powerful, and this is when he decided to attack Venom. With no other choice left at his disposal, the Venom symbiote bonded with the Hulk. But even the might of the Hulk wasn't enough to defeat Carnage. Cletus stripped the Venom symbiote off of Hulk and then absorbed him into himself. With Venom now lost, Eddie felt defeated, but fate had another vicious blow to deal. The Maker's machine wasn't as it seemed. Instead of destroying the codices, it was storing them. Through this entire chaos, Eddie somehow managed to break into the machine, and he ended up absorbing all the codices that were stored in it. Now bonded with several of the former codices, Eddie turned into the Legion, an amalgamation of dozens of hosts, symbiotes, and voices, all of them screaming in unison. Only one thing: it is time to stop Carnage once and for all. And that is exactly what Eddie is doing right now. He's fighting Carnage to the death. However, Carnage can't help stop gloating about how he is finally going to wake up Knull. His horde of symbiotes is attacking New York, and most of them are currently in Rex Strickland's warehouse, trying to get to Eddie's son Dylan. Dylan, along with Normie Osborn, is currently being protected by the Avengers and X-Men. However, things aren't looking good. It seems that they are going to be overpowered by the symbiotes. Thanks to the number of codices Carnage and Eddie have absorbed, both of them can see through the eyes of the symbiotes. And when Eddie sees what is happening in the warehouse, he knows that things are dire. Carnage's sole purpose is to complete the Hive Mind, and he is awfully close to that goal. However, the tide of war is turned when Cloak teleports into the warehouse along with Dagger, Iron Fist, Firestar, Morbius, Deathlock, Captain Marvel, Deadpool, and Scream. As Eddie continues his assault on Carnage, and his friends continue to fight the symbiotes, the only one left to protect the two boys is Spider-Man, and unfortunately, Peter is quite exhausted. He manages to defeat a symbiote that is currently coming for the boys, but once that is done, Peter loses consciousness. When Carnage sees this through his symbiote's eyes, he knows that he is only an inch away from victory. He commands his symbiote to take over Dylan, and Eddie screams in horror when he realizes what Carnage is doing. He attacks Carnage with renewed ferocity, while down below in the warehouse, the symbiote approaches the two boys. However, Dylan has a trick up his sleeve. He stands between the symbiote and Normie Osborn, puts up his arms and screams, "I hate all this symbiote bullshit." With these words, we see Dylan's eyes go pitch black. They have the same red swirls inside them that we saw in Eddie's eyes when he was being shown visions by Knull. And then, with a single blast of his power, Dylan completely decimates the symbiote attacking them. However, this is the first time he has used his powers. He and Normie both are surprised by this, but Dylan is not only surprised, he is too exhausted. He falls unconscious in Normie's arms, and that is when his father and Carnage break in through the roof. Carnage crawls towards Dylan because he knows that if he absorbs the boy, he will complete the Hive Mind. Eddie desperately tries to hold on to his ankle in an attempt to save his son, but that is when Carnage reveals his true plan. This was all a setup. Eddie has been had. Carnage is in a win-win situation because if Eddie kills Carnage, he will end up absorbing Venom. This too will complete the Hive Mind, and if he does not kill Carnage, Cletus will end up absorbing Dylan, which too will complete the Hive Mind. Either way, Knull will be woken up from his slumber, and he will regain control over the symbiotes once again. Eddie pauses momentarily as he realizes that dichotomy of the choice he is about to make, but he doesn't care about the world. He only cares about his son, and so he summons a sword using the symbiotes and kills Carnage. He slices the resurrected serial killer in half, and his remains fall to the ground with a loud crunch, because what remains of Cletus Cassidy are just his bones. But with this move, all of the symbiotes begin to get absorbed by Eddie. All of the codices left behind by Carnage, including the venom symbiote who informs Eddie that the hive mind is complete. But Eddie doesn't need to be told this. He is now a part of the hive, and although he has conscious control of himself, he can see that Knull is waking up. Back on Klyntar, the entire planet begins to rumble, and then when Knull opens his eyes, all of the symbiotes that were imprisoning him break free, because he is now in control of them. They now answer only to him, the true god of darkness, of the black abyss, and Knull doesn't waste time commanding them. He quickly forms his symbiotic armor around him, summons the symbiote dragons, and then begins his crusade against all of creation once again. Web of Venom, Wraith, the god of light. Since learning about Knull, Wraith has been searching for him ever since. Wraith is a nameless Kree. His name is Zach Dell. He was born on Markshots, which is now a black site prison for the Kree forces. It once used to be a paradise, a bustling city established by his father that was razed to the ground by Kree forces once they had learned what his father Simdell was up to. Once the Death Troops had finished their job, the Kree had then built a prison city on top of the paradise built by his father. As Wraith remembers about this, he contemplates visiting his dad's lab again. However, the teleporter gauntlet that he is using isn't exactly in great shape. It is unstable, and too much use of it could end up killing him. He has just saved a woman that was being tortured by Kree soldiers, and so instead of stressing out his gauntlet, he decides to manually visit his dad's lab again. Wraith has a lot of unique weapons at his disposal. Apart from the teleporter gauntlet, he also has a shape-shifting weapon. He uses the weapon to create an energy gun and then blasts a hole through the pavement to reach his father's lab that is buried under the prison. Wraith had a lot of parts to play in the war that was being waged by Thanos across the universe. He had just handed Gamora to Thanos, and in exchange had received a digital disc that contained 2 coordinates. The first set of coordinates led him to his dad's old lab. The second set, however, was encrypted. Wraith has unique abilities. Every time he stabbed himself, he regained some of his memories, and so when he sees a strange Kree symbol on the wall of his father's lab, he decides to cut himself to remember his past. As Wraith gets visions of his past, he remembers that his father had been looking for a way to repel the darkness that had been taking over the entire galaxy. His father had created a new font of energy that he claimed could bring light to the entire galaxy. For this pursuit and invention, the Kree Empire had sentenced his father to death along with the entire planetoid of Markshots. Wraith had then been banished, and he was stranded in the exoteric latitude. This is where he was infected by the Exelon parasite, a parasite that was born out of the pure living abyss that his father called the darkness. Armed with these memories, Wraith continues to explore the graffiti on the walls of his father's lab. He finally strikes gold when he finds a spiral sigil of the symbiote hive mind. As he discovers all of these symbols on the wall, he regrets never having learnt what his father was trying to do. As he places the hand on the wall and wallows in his regrets, Wraith decides that it is time he visited the second set of coordinates. If the first set led to his father's lab, then the second set is surely bound to lead somewhere that is, again, tied to his past. He knows that his teleporter gauntlet is unstable and the distance is too far. Despite this, Wraith decides to risk his life and punches in the coordinates. However, nothing in his memory or in his past could have prepared them for this, because once he teleports, he lands outside the planet of Klyntar, the symbiote's homeworld and Knull's cage. As Wraith lands on the surface and walks with his weapon in hand, he can feel the planet talking to him. He can feel that the entire planet is alive. He can't understand what kind of place this is until a name is shoved into his mind forcefully. The name is Eddie Brock, and Wraith knows that this name is important because he is being shown visions of Eddie's torture. The visions keep getting more and more intense, and Wraith screams aloud as he realizes that he needs to find a way way to stop these visions. He needs to find a way to stop this force from invading his mind, but by the time he realizes this, it is already too late. The surface beneath his feet explodes, and he is engulfed in bright white light. All the symbiotes have been released from their so-called planet, and what remains is simply Wraith and a black goo from which Knull is emerging. Wraith knows that Knull is an ancient force, and he needs to stop him, but by the time he can raise his arm to shoot Knull, he is already awake. Knull is now controlling all the symbiotes, and he has built himself a temporary throne out of them. Symbiote heads spawn out of it as though tentacles of an octopus. Knull walks down from the stairs of his throne as he says, "I am sorry. Do I know you? I've just woken up from a long slumber. You uncertainly feel familiar. You are Exelon God, Knull. You are the one who stole my soul, and I want..." But before Wraith can say more, he is interrupted by Knull, who knows nothing about what he is saying. Wraith calls him a liar and tells him that he was infected by his parasite in the exoteric latitude. When he mentions exoteric latitude, Knull seems to remember. He remembers that he had used the exoteric latitude as his experimental playground. It was a dumping ground for his experiments while trying to perfect the symbiotes, and so Wraith had it been infected by something that Knull had discarded, thinking that it was imperfect. "You were born from my trash, child." Wraith is silent for the next few minutes. He has finally gotten what he has been searching for all his life: answers. And now that he has his answers, it is time he made his last stand. But he is too slow. Before he can shoot Knull or even draw his gun, he is caught by him. Knull holds Wraith up by the throat and says, "You want to be free, child? Then I release you." And with these words, Knull rips off the symbiote from Wraith and tosses them into space. Now that the Exelon has been ripped from Wraith's body, Knull remembers this symbiote. He uses the Exelon to resurrect the all-black Necrosword, and then gives birth to his symbiote dragons once again. Wraith watches on helplessly as he realizes that he has just aided in the resurrection of Knull. In a desperate attempt, Wraith tries to antagonize and call out Knull. "Kill me, you coward! Finish it!" he screams, and Knull simply kicks him into oblivion and off of his planet. As Wraith drifts into space, aimlessly waiting for his death, he is suddenly engulfed by bright golden light. In the golden light, he sees the same sigil that he saw in his father's lab, and then hears the same voice that he heard before. The same voice repeating the same name again, Eddie Brock. The light passes, but the voice is still seared in Wraith's brain, and with it, he has his one last mission. He punches in the coordinates of Earth into his teleporter gauntlet one last time, and then launches his dying self through space and time. Back on Earth, Eddie is enjoying a hot dog with his son Dylan. Dylan is adding ketchup to his hot dog, and Eddie is teasing him about the same. His son retorts with the response that he eats brains, and Eddie realizes that he is never going to live this one down. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Wraith appears in the middle of the street, his form slowly fading into nothingness. Eddie quickly transforms, but the venom symbiote tells him to stand down because he can sense a connection to the man. He can't quite place his finger on it yet, but either way, he's sure of one thing, that Wraith is dying, and so they don't need to attack him. Eddie walks up to Wraith and demands answers. With his dying breath, Wraith says, "Eddie Brock, it is coming for you." "Who is? Knull? Are you talking about Knull?" "No, there is another. Knull has a shadow. He has an opposite, a god of light." And with these last words, Wraith fades into nothingness, leaving Eddie more confused than ever. But where Wraith once stood is now the symbol of the god of the light, seared into the asphalt. King in Black #1. The king arrives. Eddie is standing on a rooftop waiting for the inevitable, now that he wields the power of all the codices that he absorbed after Carnage was killed. He has a strong connection with the hive mind, and Eddie knows that Knull is on his way to Earth. He can feel the King in Black speeding through the darkness, heading straight towards humanity's annihilation. Eddie's entire being feels like it is getting absorbed by the black abyss, which is in stark contrast to the brightly lit skyline of New York City behind him. He has done all he can to prepare for Knull's arrival. He has informed the Avengers, informed S.H.I.E.L.D., has brought Peter and Miles up to speed. something he could never imagine himself doing a few years ago. But now the threat is inevitable, and not only the entire planet, but the entire creation is at stake. Knull is a threat to the entire multiverse, and so if they are to make their last stand, if Eddie is to make his last stand, then he needs every help that he can get. And so when he feels Knull approaching the planet, there is only one thing left to do. Eddie turns on his radio and says, "Captain, it's me. It's time." Eddie needs to face this threat head on. He needs to do this for his son. And so after he has radioed Captain America, he leaps off of the building while transforming himself into the Venom. He swings through New York City's skyline as we see that the call of the fight has gone out to every hero possible on Earth. However, before he can face Knull, there is one last thing Eddie needs to do. He swings to the penthouse, where his son, Dylan, is sleeping soundly. He seems to have passed out while watching TV. There is junk food on the table beside him, while an open comic lays sprawled on the couch. This is the thing Eddie is most scared of. The idea of waking his son up from a nightmare to a living nightmare. Eddie's face is laced with concern. He looks down at his sleeping son in the dark as he realizes what he is about to do. His son has been through so much. Eddie knows that he doesn't deserve this. Eddie knows that he has no choice, but he wants to savor this moment. And so he sits on the table beside his son as he contemplates everything. "I wish on every disappearing star in the sky that I could just let him sleep, that my son never has to face the horrors of the world that I have brought him into, that he never has to inherit my darkness." Once Eddie is done with his futile wishes, he wakes Dylan up. Dylan wakes up from his sleep while rubbing his eyes as Eddie tells him that Knull is about to attack Earth. Dylan knows his father is telling the truth because he can feel Knull too. Eddie then explains what they are going to do. While this is going on, Iron Man and Captain America are keeping a close eye on Earth's orbit from the Avengers Mountain. They're flanked by Captain Marvel and She-Hulk. Captain America is barking orders into the radio, urging everyone from S.H.I.E.L.D. to mobilize and prepare for the assault. Captain America then asks Tony for an update. Tony tells Steve that from what Brock had told them, the symbiotes do not leave a heat signature. This is why it has become hard for Tony to track them in orbit. But either way, he has high hopes for the minefield he has laid around Earth. "Is that what we're calling them?" says Captain America, clearly unimpressed by Tony, and Tony says, "Silver linings, Captain, silver linings." The minefield set up by Tony around Earth is, in fact, a leftover armada of derelict Kree and Skrull warships. He has rigged them to blow up upon impact, and Captain America remarks that Tony simply likes turning things into bombs. Tony is quite smug about his creation, overconfident in fact, because as Captain America and him are quipping, Captain Marvel tells them to look at the monitors. The symbiote dragons are here, which means Knull is here, and by the looks of it, Tony's minefield isn't going to be enough to stop them. Snarling and gnashing through space, the dragons crash into the minefield set up by Tony. Once they are close enough, Tony triggers the explosives. Silent screams of the dragons echo through space as they are blown up by the exploding ships. As the night sky is lit up by the explosions, Eddie is leading Dylan to safety in the bunker built by Ezekiel Sims. The bunker has been loaned to him by Spider-Man. As Eddie and Dylan descend a flight of stairs, Eddie suddenly recoils in pain. This was the result of him being connected to the hive mind, and he just felt the pain of the dragons dying. But as he recovers, he hears Venom tell him that this wasn't enough. In fact, far from it. Meanwhile, Iron Man is busy gloating about his minefield over the radio when Eddie interrupts him and says, "It did not work. Took out at least 100 of them, but it didn't even slow them down. Oh my God, he can't be stopped." This realization hits to Eddie as he finally sees what Knull has planned for them. Now that he is close to Earth, Eddie can see the extent of the hive mind. As the realization dawns upon Eddie, it does so for Iron Man too. Tony's expression quickly changes when he realizes what his monitors are showing. However, Captain America has no time for this. He quickly jumps into action and starts mobilizing everyone. "All teams move, move, move! This is not a drill!" He rushes through the corridors of Avengers Mountain mountain with Captain Marvel and She-Hulk close behind him. As the S.H.I.E.L.D. Quinjets along with the Fantastic Four approach New York City from the water, we see the extent of the attack, the war being waged by Knull against humanity. Millions of symbiote dragons fall from the sky and dive towards the ground like kamikaze pilots. The urgency of this situation is now hitting everyone on Earth, but most of all, it is hitting Eddie, who is currently sprinting through the bunker, desperately trying to get Dylan to safety. The bunker has been designed to withstand a nuclear holocaust, yet Eddie is doubtful if it would be able to survive Knull's assault. While running behind his father, Dylan desperately tries to plead with him. Eddie's son wants to be a part of the fight, but Eddie is not going to listen to such requests. Dylan continues to press his father by telling him that he has powers just like Knull. But that is when Eddie has had enough. He looks at his son and snarls, "Dylan, that's enough. I made you a promise. I told you I would protect you no matter what." However, before he can say more, Eddie stops. He sulks for a moment and gathers his thoughts. He then looks up at his son and apologizes to him. All of this that is happening to Dylan, all the powers and all the nightmares that he has to deal with, is because of Eddie himself. Eddie blames himself for the life his son has been cursed with. He then unlocks the bunker, pushes his son inside, and then begins to lock the door again. He promises his son that one way or the other, he's going to stop Knull's assault. Before the bunker's doors close, Dylan begs his dad to make sure that he comes back. Eddie then takes a last look at Dylan and says, "I love you, son," and then bang. With a loud clang of metal, the bunker's doors close. He is then contacted by Captain America, who informs him that they have switched to Plan B. Eddie simply puts his head down because he knows that after what he had seen through the hive mind, they would have to go to Plan B. Plan A was to stop Knull and his armies from ever reaching Earth. The idea was to fight them in space and keep them in space where they could deal with them without endangering humans on Earth. But now that Captain America had switched to Plan B, this meant that the armies had touched ground. And Eddie is right, because outside the entire city of New York is encased in black goo, the same symbiote goo that is the domain of Knull. Eddie tells us that, according to Plan B, Captain America is supposed to handle the first wave, the ground wave. He already has an evacuation team at hand, and they're likely right now helping the citizens of New York and other cities escape to safety. And the next panel shows us Captain America doing exactly this. The entire ground is now covered in black goo, and it falls from the sky as if it was raining symbiotes. The Avengers and Eddie know for sure that at one point in the past, Thor was able to defeat Knull, but the problem they face right now is that Thor is nowhere to be found. "Where is Thor? We need backup now, Tony." "Don't worry, Captain. Our other big gun is entering orbit now. It shouldn't be long." But then something unexpected happened. All the higher-ups in the S.H.I.E.L.D. as well as the Avengers were psychically contacted by Professor Charles Xavier. "This is Charles Xavier. If you require backup, please stand by. My X-Men are here." And we then see the entire team of mutants join the fight. Marvel Girl, Nightcrawler, Cyclops, Cable, Wolverine, everyone is here. And then Charles Xavier reveals the ace up his sleeve. "I understand that Thor's absence is a significant hurdle. Surely a god of thunder would be helpful, but may I suggest a goddess instead?" And that is when Storm bursts onto the scene and uses her powers to lay waste to tens of dragons at a time. This was the second wave. The second wave, which is now being handled by the X-Men. But then Eddie tells us about the third wave. The third wave was going to be the worst of them all. And in order to prepare for it, Eddie is currently swinging through the sewers of New York City, making his way towards the spire left by Carnage. This is when he is contacted by Tony over the radio, who says, "Cap has the evacuation in action, and Storm is bringing in the heat. Everyone is assembled and waiting on you, Eddie." And now we realize why the third wave was going to be the worst. It's because Eddie and Venom are responsible for taking care of it. Eddie and Venom are risking their lives on the simple theory that they would be able to use Carnage's spire to safely connect to the hive mind without being consumed by it. The emphasis here should be on the word theory, because Eddie has no way of making sure if this is actually going to work. Eddie is hoping that, just like Thor, maybe Doctor Strange or Storm can use their magic or lightning to sever the connection between the symbiotes and the hive mind. Once that is done, maybe Eddie would be able to take control of them using the Carnage Spire. The spire is in a derelict part of the sewers. The ground is covered in red, while the walls are covered in symbiotic goo. Eddie knows that this is quite a risky maneuver that could easily cost him his life, but either way, he has no choice. Time is up, and he needs to take action right now. As soon as Eddie reaches the spire, he sits down on the throne and then connects himself to the hive mind. As soon as the connection is made, Eddie winces in pain, and his eyes turn completely red this time with swirls of black instead. However, as soon as Eddie gets connected to the hive mind, there is another problem at hand. Doctor Strange is about to be overpowered by the dragons. Even though Strange has faced symbiotes before, these are nothing like his previous adversaries. These dragons are too powerful. They are able to break through his magical barriers as soon as he creates them. He broadcasts a message for help, which is heard by every hero around him, including Eddie. Eddie begs for Doctor Strange to hold on as he desperately tries to establish a connection with the hive mind. But by the time Eddie connects to the hive mind, it is already too late. Too late for Doctor Strange and too late for him. As Doctor Strange gets overpowered, he is engulfed in the black goo. Simultaneously, Eddie connects to the hive mind and realizes the extent of Knull's attack. While he still has some sort of control over his body and mind, Eddie radios Tony and screams, "Oh God, run! Run! It's not just the dragons, it's not just Knull!" And before Eddie can say more, the next panel, or in fact, the next 2 pages, show us what Eddie has been warning the Avengers about. Descending from the sky, engulfed from head to toe and symbiotic goo, are the remaining Celestials of this multiverse. Knull has managed to do the unthinkable. He has not only defeated the Celestials before arriving on Earth, but has managed to control them. They are now a part of his hive mind. They are now a part of his domain, the Black Abyss, and Knull is now their king. Every mutant, superhero, and Avenger watches in horror as these gigantic entities descend upon Earth. As they descend, Eddie informs everyone about what they're seeing. He tells them that the Celestials were the first opponents Knull ever faced, and now that he is awake, he has exacted his revenge on them. The Celestials land on Earth with a loud thud. Whether they crush buildings or bones beneath their feet, it doesn't matter to them, because it doesn't matter to Knull. The dragons begin circling around the Celestials, anticipating the arrival of their god, and that is when Knull makes his appearance. With loud clanking of metal, the torso of one of the Celestials opens up, and out steps Knull, who says, "Ah, I see my reputation precedes me, so I won't waste your time." His voice is raspy, thick, but is full of confidence. As he steps out of the Celestial, there is an expression of annoyance on his face, as though conquering Earth and coming here is a large inconvenience to him. He continues to say, "I am going to kill your world. In the meantime, I am looking for a human named Brock, so bring him to me. And this can be as painless and quick as I am capable. That is all." Captain America orders everyone to retreat as he and Black Panther escape. Captain America orders everyone to retreat as he and Black Panther escape a large explosion, but it is too late to retreat. Knull is already here, and he plans to have some fun while he's at it. He sprouts dragon wings from his back and then leaps down towards our heroes. "Well, look at this! A welcoming party for my coronation! How nice! And who are you all supposed to be?" Knull lands on the ground and turns towards all the heroes facing him. Miss Marvel, Captain America, Wolverine, Spider-Man, Marvel Girl, Iron Fist, Captain Marvel, The Thing, all stand their ground to face Knull. It is only Captain America who talks to Knull, because he and Tony have been planning something, and it's time the plan came to fruition. Captain America looks at Knull and says, "Normally, we're the last thing guys like you ever see, but today, we are just here to watch." A sly smile spreads across Captain America's face as he hears Tony say over the radio, "He's here and awaiting your orders, Cap. Permission to engage." And finally, Captain America gives the orders everyone has been waiting for. Permission granted. And this order is meant for Sentry, who upon approval dives down towards Earth from space and kills one of the Celestials instantly. Sentry uses the force of his dive to punch a hole in the Celestial's head, and this sprays large amounts of blood everywhere. The sound of the Celestial's head getting squished and exploding can be heard for miles. And when Knull sees this, he rages with anger. He vows to kill Sentry for this act of insolence. Knull then tries to attack Sentry, but he is too fast for him. Sentry dodges Knull's attack, grabs him from behind, and then flies into space with him. As they are exiting Earth's orbit, Sentry introduces himself to Knull. "Hi, my name is Bob. You can call me the Sentry. This will all be over over in a... But before Sentry can finish his sentence, the tables turn in an instant. Knull turns around, grabs Sentry by the throat, and then tells Sentry that he remembers who he is. His symbiotes have memories of him. After all, he was the one who killed Carnage. But the problem here is Sentry doesn't know Knull, and it's about time Knull introduced himself to him. Knull uses his other hand to grab Sentry's waist, and then, with a single movement of his shoulders, he rips him in half. Sentry's guts rain back down on Earth as everybody realizes what Knull has done. In his dying moments, Sentry tried to tell Knull that he would release the Void from him, but Knull never cared about it because he wanted the Void all to himself. Knull ends up easily absorbing the Void as Eddie and the rest of the heroes battle with the hard truth that Sentry has been killed. Eddie's eyes widen with shock. Captain America keeps screaming in disbelief, and Tony, he simply lowers his head in shame. After all, he was the one who theorized that Sentry could take on Knull and win the fight. As they all lament and come to terms with the adversary that they are facing, we see that up above in space, Knull has already absorbed the Void with ease. After all, he is the King of the Void, the Emperor of the Black Abyss. Tony is the first one to snap out of his daze. He begs for Captain America and the rest of the heroes to get out of the front lines instantly. Tony knows they have lost the fight and they need to live to fight another day, but Captain America isn't about to listen to him. There are people that need to be saved. He orders Tony to evacuate and save as many people as he can, while he and the rest of the heroes hold the line. That is when, with his newfound powers, Knull lands back on Earth. He mocks the defiant last stand the heroes tried to make against him, and then, with the single gesture of his arm, begins to ensnare everyone in the symbiotic goo that now covers almost all of Earth. Spider-Man is the only one who is able to escape the symbiotic goo while the rest of the heroes get encased in it. Knull then begins to carry out the next part of his plan. No more distractions. The sky of yours is too bright. This needs to go. No more sun, no more stars, no more light. And with these words and a few more gestures, Knull begins to encase the entire planet in the symbiotic goo. Within minutes, a shell of the symbiotic goo begins to form around the Earth, and after a few more minutes, the entire planet is encased in it. Knull has just blocked out the sun and has plunged the entire Earth into darkness, a simple glimpse for humanity into the domain that he rules. Once this happens and the entire Earth is plunged into the darkness, every hero begins to panic. Storm is the only light that currently exists in Knull's domain, and he knows that she is the only danger to his powers, and so she easily becomes his next target. Iron Man and Charles Xavier watch powerlessly as Knull summons a large claw made out of the symbiotic goo that quickly takes care of Storm without any effort, and this enrages Tony. There is only one man he can turn to now, Eddie Brock. He radios Eddie, and with a stern voice he says, "Eddie Brock, I swear to God, you two better have some good news for me, or I'm going to..." But that is when Eddie interrupts Iron Man, and what Eddie says makes Tony question the severity of the situation. Eddie is going to give Knull what he wants. He's going to hand himself over to Knull. Iron Man desperately pleads for Eddie to not go through with this plan. Knull has already declared that he is going to destroy the world, whether he gets hold of Eddie or not. But that is when Eddie says that maybe handing over himself to Knull will buy the Earth some time to retaliate. But right now, after all that has happened, all the people that have just been sacrificed, Eddie has to make a stand. He isn't going to run away anymore. Without waiting for a reply, Eddie cuts off the radio. Eddie then has an emotional talk with his own symbiote Venom while being connected to the Carnage spire. Venom too is ready to sacrifice himself, and after saying one last goodbye to each other, they reveal themselves to Knull in the hive mind. And it does not even take a second for Knull to find them in the real world. With the same symbiotic claw that he used to capture Storm, Knull breaks in through the street and into the sewers. "Yes, hello little one, I heard you calling." He grabs Eddie without any effort and then tosses him back into the air like a toy. Eddie flies as high as the Empire State Building as Knull says, "Come to me, join us, look at what we have created." And Eddie looks on in horror as he sees the entire city of New York covered from head to toe in symbiotic goo. Once again, Knull holds Eddie by the throat as the two of them talk. The only difference is, this time, Knull is standing on top of the Empire State Building. Eddie begs for Knull to take him instead of the Earth, but that is when a confused Knull removes the Venom symbiote from Eddie's face and realizes the mistake that he has made. He apologizes to Eddie and says says that he should have mentioned which Brock he's looking for. Terror flashes before Eddie's eyes as he realizes what Knull is trying to say. Knull has come here for Dylan Brock, Eddie's son, and under no circumstances can Eddie let this happen. He begs for Knull to take him in his son's stead, but with a nonchalant expression on his face, Knull refuses his offer. He begins to strip the venom symbiote out of Eddie's body as he says, "No, I think not. I will take my child from you, and then I will take yours." Once venom has been stripped from Eddie's body, Knull looks at him and continues to say, "But I'm afraid I don't have much use for you, host." And then, just like that, Knull lets him go and Eddie plummets to his death from the top of the Empire State Building. King in Black number 2. Death is inevitable. The sound of metal crunching and bones breaking is what breaks Eddie's fall. He lands on top of a car with a loud bang. Hundreds of bones in his body break in an instant. Most, if not all, of his joints are dislocated. And his blood? His blood is finding new crevices in his body. The sound of Eddie's fall is heard by the only superhero that has survived Knull, Spider-Man. Peter rushes to Eddie's aid while fearing the worst, that they might have lost Venom. Peter himself is in a bad shape. His entire body is bruised and his mask has been torn in half, and yet all he can think about is saving Eddie. He screams on top of his lungs for help, hoping that somebody might have survived Knull's assault, but that is when Eddie stirs to life. With a broken voice, he tells Peter to take care of Dylan in case something happens to him. Knull is watching all of this unfold from the top of the Empire State Building. The fact that Eddie hasn't died yet irks him. He's annoyed by the fact that not only Eddie has managed to survive, but so has Spider-Man. It is time that he corrected this mistake. Knull raises his arms, and this is when Peter's spidey senses begin to tingle. He knows that he is about to be attacked, and so in the nick of time, Peter manages to duck, just as an energy blast flies over his head. Till this point, Peter thought that Knull had killed everyone, that he had laid waste to the Avengers and the X-Men. But when Peter turns around to look at the source of the energy blast, he realizes that Knull never killed the Avengers or the X-Men. He instead turned them. The symbiotes took over their bodies, and these super beings now answer to Knull. The energy blast was fired by Cyclops, and he is not alone. Standing behind him are The Thing, Storm, She-Hulk, Miss Marvel, and Captain America. All of them have been infected by the symbiotes, and every one of them is grinning a wicked smile. They are here to kill Peter and Eddie. Their king's incomplete mission will now be completed by them. Peter begins to panic as he realizes that this situation is quite dire. If there is any chance that he is going to save Eddie, he needs to get out of here right now. But then Peter's worries are put to rest when he looks up, because the Human Torch is here. Johnny blasts his way through a symbiote dragon and then places himself between the infected Avengers and Peter. Johnny orders Spider-Man to take Eddie to the Fantastic Four lab while he takes care of the infected Avengers. "Fire doesn't hurt them the same way, Johnny. Don't be stupid. Come with us." But Johnny isn't about to listen. If the world is really ending, Johnny is about to go up in a blaze of glory. He tells Spider-Man that he is going to go supernova, and although this won't hurt the symbiotes, this would give Spider-Man enough time to escape with Eddie. Peter begs Johnny to not do this. If Johnny goes supernova, he's going to pass out afterwards, and then he'll be taken over by the symbiotes. But Johnny already knows this, and he has accepted his fate. I know. So hey Pete, do me a favor. Tell everyone I said something cool and heroic before I fell, yeah? After all, I have a reputation to maintain. And with these last words, Johnny taps into his energy and goes supernova. The huge blast engulfs every symbiote in sight, while Spider-Man desperately escapes by cocooning Eddie in his webbing and swinging away. However, once he reaches the Fantastic Four home base, things aren't looking good. Jane Foster, who has now taken the mantle of the Valkyrie, tells him that Eddie has broken almost every bone in his body. Spider-Man already knows this. The instant he had laid his eyes upon Eddie, he knew that the man was close to dying. But right now, he wants good news. He wants Jane to tell him how they're going to fix Eddie. But that is when Jane implores him to see that she is no longer the doctor that he thinks she is. She is now the Valkyrie. And fixing Eddie is up to Reed Richards. However, she tells Spider-Man that the power of the Valkyrie has a few perks. One of them is seeing how close someone is to death. And right now, Death's face is looming right above love Eddie. He is close to dying, and they need to do something if they want to save him. Spider-Man sighs and asks Jane Foster to do the best she can, but that is when Jane tells him that she has a job to do. As the Valkyrie, she is supposed to shepherd dead souls to Valhalla, and right now, she needs to take care of Sentry's soul. Spider-Man goes on his own journey because he needs to take care of Dylan. Dylan has been anxiously waiting in the bunker, watching the news when Spider-Man arrives. When Peter sheepishly looks at Dylan, Eddie's son, already knows what to expect. He simply looks at Peter and asks if his father is dead, and Peter is surprised by this blunt approach. He tells Dylan that when he left Eddie, he was still living, but he is close to dying. He then picks up Dylan's duffel bag and tells him that they need to go. When Spider-Man and Dylan reach the Fantastic Four lab, they find it in utter chaos. Reed Richards is busy studying the symbiote, while Black Panther desperately inquires about Thor's whereabouts. On the other side of the room, Blade is arguing with Professor Xavier and Magneto. Professor Xavier and Magneto want to keep the doors to Krakoa shut, but Blade tells them that the entire universe is at stake. There won't be a Krakoa to protect if they won't act right now. Peter interrupts them all and asks about Eddie's health. This is when everybody falls silent. It seems that they had overlooked Eddie while Peter was gone. Reed is the only one who seems to have been keeping an eye on his health. He tells Peter that there has been no change so far, but they are doing their best to help Eddie survive. Once Peter has been given the update, all of them go back to discussing how they're going to face Knull. This is when Black Panther brings up the subject of all the superweapons that they have accumulated over the years. What about the Infinity Stones, the Cosmic Cube, the Ultimate Nullifier? What do we have on hand that we could use against Knull? Blade is taken aback by this suggestion. How could Black Panther suggest using such weapons just on one guy? This is when Valkyrie chimes in and tells Blade that Knull is the ultimate threat that the universe faces. He existed before time itself. He is the king of the abyss. He has already killed the Celestials, and so nothing is off the table. However, this is when a familiar yet unwelcome voice joins the conversation. It is Namor, and he is here to join the fight as well. He tells the heroes that his people have been fighting the abyss for millions of years. He's here to join the fight. Blade doesn't like Namor, nor does Reed, but they need every bit of help they can get. Namor then slams his trident on the floor and says, "Now do any of the adults in the room actually have anything to offer in the way of a plan?" And this is when Tony, who has been quiet all this while, finally joins in on the conversation. He tells everyone that he has a plan, but that plan is something they all are going to hate. Tony's plan is to capture a dragon symbiote that can be bonded to Eddie in order to heal him. They need to save Eddie's life because he is the only one who can get close to the hive mind and has a chance to defeat Knull. Peter is confused because they could get any symbiote to bond with Eddie in order to save his life. This is when Dylan joins in on the conversation and informs Peter that the dragon symbiotes are more powerful. He reminds him of the time when Carnage bonded to a dragon symbiote and was nearly invincible. Tony says that he is the one who is going to get the symbiote, and meanwhile, he has plans for the rest of them. Tony sends Namor to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. This is where the Atlanteans keep their most feared adversaries, the Black Tide. Namor needs to go and recruit them for the war. He then sends Blade to Chernobyl in Ukraine. Blade is supposed to recruit the vampires and Dracula for the fight. True to his style, by the time Blade reaches Dracula, the entire facility is covered in vampire blood, guts, and limbs. Blade is going to recruit the vampires one way or the other. Tony also contacts Mayor Wilson Fisk. The mayor is going to recruit supervillains for the fight. We then see Wilson Fisk arrive at the bar with no name, where he offers money to all the supervillains so that he can recruit them for the fight. Tony then flies out of the facility and straight into a dragon symbiote's mouth. Tony knows that in order to sever the dragon from the hive mind, he is going to have to rewrite its entire DNA. But thankfully, Tony has prepared for this. His creation, the Extremis virus, is designed to do exactly this. Tony infects the symbiote dragon from the inside, and as the virus begins to take its effects, the dragon screams out loud. Once the connection to the hive mind has been severed, Tony lets the symbiote attach to his armor. However, once this happens, Tony begins to cry cry out in pain. He can feel all the people that have been absorbed by the hive mind. He can hear all the millions of voices, and this is too much for him to handle. Back at the lab, Dylan is regretting leaving his father alone. If only he was there, he could have used his powers to save him. Spider-Man or the rest of them don't know about Dylan's powers. When Spider-Man reassures Dylan that there is nothing he could have done, Dylan tries to tell Peter about his powers. But before he can complete his sentence, they are all interrupted by Iron Man, who stumbles into the facility. In the short distance that Tony had to cover back to the facility, he has been completely exhausted by the experience of hosting the symbiote. Tony quickly walks over to Eddie and lets the symbiote attach to him. However, as the symbiote takes over Eddie's body, the health monitors begin spiking. For some reason, the symbiote seems to be killing Eddie. Reed Richards desperately tries to pull the symbiote off of Eddie in an attempt to save his life, while Tony is too consumed by the fact that his plan did not work. All three of them, including Spider-Man, are too focused on what is happening. No one is paying attention to Dylan, who is screaming at the top of his lungs for everyone to get away from his father. He then lets out a guttural scream and uses his powers to completely atomize the symbiote. In an instant, the symbiote is destroyed, and everybody in the room is shocked that Dylan has powers. This is the breakthrough they needed. Reed can't believe that they have finally found a way to defeat Knull. He begins raving about how Dylan can be their secret weapon, but fails to notice the single tone that is echoing through the entire facility. Sue has to stop him because the tone they are hearing is the sound of Eddie flatlining. They all stand around Eddie's body with their heads lowered as Dylan begins to cry, realizing that his father has just died. King in Black number 3. Where there is darkness, there is always light. A mysterious cosmic entity has been following Knull's warpath ever since he started taking over the galaxies. It can feel the dark overpowering the light in the entire universe. It can feel the dying souls, the lack of prayers, and most of all, the lack of light. This mysterious entity is headed towards Earth, and above all, above everything else, it can feel Dylan's powers. It can feel the boy mourning his father's death. While the war above rages on, Dylan is busy mourning the loss of his father. He is currently sprawled on top of Eddie's dead body. The mysterious entity can feel the entire Earth choking under the dome of the symbiotic goo laid down by Knull. Up above on the surface, Sue Storm and Blade, along with his army of vampires, are fighting against the symbiote horde. Although Blade has a lot of vampires at his disposal, it is getting tougher and tougher for them to hold their own with each passing second. They need a plan, and they need it fast. Sue is busy talking to Reed over the radio, imploring him to enact the plan as soon as possible, but Reed is too enamored by what he has just found. He has just discovered the data disk that Wraith gave to Eddie, the same disk that Wraith got from Thanos, the same disk that led Wraith to Klyntar, which ultimately resulted in his demise. Reed has discovered the unique signature of the data disk. It is the same signature as Dylan's powers, and the data disk has the same sigil that Wraith found on the walls of his father's lab, the same sigil that was left on the asphalt once Wraith had succumbed to his death. Reed is too busy going over this fact, coming up with theories as to what this would mean, completely oblivious to the fact that the love of his life is about to get overpowered by the symbiotes. She screams for him to do something over the radio, and this is when Mr. Fantastic snaps out of his stupor. He is joined by Wolverine and Spider-Man in the lab, and it's about time they enacted their plan. The plan is simple. They are going to lead Dylan out of the lab, and he's going to use his powers to sever the symbiote's connection from the hive mind. It seems that Peter is the only one who is concerned about Dylan's health. He tells Dylan that he would completely understand if the kid does not want to do this. All of them fail to notice that Dylan's tears have turned to blood. Mr. Fantastic is busy going over the plan one last time with Namor, Professor Xavier, Iron Man, Magneto, and Invisible Woman. In case the Fantastic Four lab falls, Professor Xavier is in charge of keeping them in touch psychically. Once the plan has been discussed one last time, Wolverine and Mr. Fantastic turn towards Dylan. Everyone ready? Dylan finally gets up from his father's body while wiping his tears away. This is when Peter asks him for the last time if he needs something, and with rage in his eyes, Dylan looks up and says, "I need to hurt something." Now that Dylan is consciously wielding his powers, we see that his eyes are completely black with red swirls inside them. His tears are red as well, and the nerves around his eyes have begun to pop, and so so the assault begins. Dylan is led out of the lab with Spider-Man and Wolverine in charge of protecting him. Spider-Man reminds everyone that the symbiote horde is nothing but innocent humans that have been taken over. They need to be careful when they fight them. As Dylan is led outside, he is attacked by the infected Captain America. Captain throws his shield at him, which is caught by Dylan without any effort. "Sorry, Cap, I'm gonna need to borrow this." Enraged to his core by this action, the infected Captain America lunges at Dylan, but Dylan does not even bat an eye. He instead simply prepares himself and says, "I know you're in there, Knull. I know you are connected to Cap. I hope you can feel this, and I hope this hurts." With these words, Dylan uses his powers to completely atomize the symbiote from Captain America's body, and as he does this, Knull screams out in pains on top of the Empire State Building. However, the show of defiance has alerted Knull of Dylan's presence. He forms a huge claw out of the symbiote goo and then reaches out for Dylan. Guys, I think I pissed him off." Captain America slowly gets to his feet and asks Dylan what is going on. Dylan, now bleeding from his nose, realizes that he can't hold Knull back. He apologizes to Captain America for failing them all, but before the claw can reach Dylan, a huge bolt of lightning burns a hole through its palm. The same hole is mimicked on Knull's hand. Knull stutters as he says, That power, familiar, but how? Who could have done this?" And this is when we see that Thor has finally joined the fight. He stands over Dylan, protecting him, and says, "You must be Dylan. I'm Thor. How may I be of service? Just have my back. I can do this. A little thunder would help." And so, with Thor by his side, Dylan begins his work. One by one, they make their way through each hero and manage to free everyone. Hulk, the Thing, everyone is freed. And this is when we hear the mysterious entity once again. For every darkness, there is light, the opposite, an equal, Thor and the child of Venom. I can feel them as I race nearer. I can feel them beating the darkness back with every breath in their lungs. As we hear the entity say this, and most of the heroes are now free of the symbiotes, we see that Knull is now angry. He finally jumps down from the Empire State Building and joins the fight. He greets Thor with his usual monologue, but Thor has no time for Knull and his speeches. He lunges at the god of Abyss, clearly hell, bent on killing him, but Knull manages to avoid his first blow easily. He then punches Thor in the face and throws him to the ground. Once Thor is down, Knull jumps on top of him and begins to choke him to death. Dylan watches this and tries to intervene, but is quickly shoved away by Knull. "Silence, boy, I've had enough of your insolence." He then shows Dylan that despite his best efforts, the heroes are still being overpowered by the symbiotes. We then see the Thing and Captain America fighting against the symbiotes valiantly, but still losing. As Dylan realizes that there is no escaping this, he begins to be taken over by the symbiote goo himself. Dylan can't control them. There are simply too many of them. And seeing Dylan taken over, Thor jumps back to his feet and kicks Knull in the face. But by now, Dylan has been taken over by the symbiotic goo, and so Thor makes his last stand against Knull. He summons all his strength and then hits Knull in the face with Mjolnir. Boom! With a loud crack, the hammer impacts against Knull's jaw and breaks it instantly. "Your world will burn for that." And this is when Knull summons the Celestials and begins to raise the entire city to the ground. And while Thor is busy staring at the Celestials, he summons his all-black necrosword and stabs Thor through his chest. Reed Richards begins to chaotically panic over the radio when he sees Thor get stabbed by Knull. This is when Tony tells him to calm down because he has a plan. When Dylan severed the connection of the extremis infected symbiote from the hive mind, Tony was able to control it better, and he is now going to use the symbiote to take over one of the Celestials. Mr. Fantastic watches in surprise as Tony takes over one of the Celestials and begins to fight the other one. The two giants fight each other while on the ground. Knull leaves Thor impaled on his sword. He then summons Dylan, calls him his son, and then takes him away. With his dying breath, Thor orders his ravens Hugin and Munin, "Find him, swiftly!" And this is when we hear a mysterious entity again. The opposite of Knull is a god of light. He exists, and he is the source of Dylan's powers. But while Knull's dome still stands, it cannot break through, but I can. And then we get to meet this mysterious entity on the next page. Flanked by Hugin and Munin, Silver Surfer speeds towards Earth. King in Black number 4, Eddie's symbiote. We then catch up with Dylan, shrouded in darkness. He is encased in the symbiotic goo, and menacing faces of symbiotes surround him, laughing maniacally, asking him to let go. They are urging him to wake up, urging him to not be afraid. This is when Knull approaches Dylan. He implores Dylan to join him. He wants Dylan to see the truth, to see that all of his heroes have fallen, and that Knull will reign supreme. But while this is going on, Dylan is contacted telepathically by a mysterious voice. The voice asks Dylan to remain calm, because this is their chance to turn the tide of war. Dylan has a tough task at hand. He needs to listen to the telepathic voice while ensuring that Knull does not catch on to his ruse. Knull has managed to repair his jaw using the symbiotic goo. He is currently gloating about winning the war. He tells Dylan that he is something special, something new. He says that although Dylan has powers, he has failed. The Earth is now Knull's domain, and he wants Dylan to join him. While this is going on, the voice tells Dylan that Knull made a terrible mistake by bringing him here, because while here, Dylan can use his powers to take over the hive mind. Knull, meanwhile, calls Dylan his son and offers him his hand. Dylan takes it, but he has a plan of his own. As he places his hand on the palm of Knull's hand, he says, "You killed my dad." And with these words, Dylan unleashes his powers. He holds on to Knull's hand as he continues to atomize the symbiotic goo from his body. Knull screams and recoils because he has never felt this kind of pain before. As Dylan continues to use his powers, the voice urges him to keep going. Dylan is now able to reach out through the hive mind and is able to destroy all the symbiotes. He starts by freeing the heroes. One by one, slowly but surely, he is able to free his heroes. Cyclops, the Human Torch, the Invisible Woman, all of them are freed one by one. The voice in his head then goes on to reveal the next part of the plan. Because sound and fire cannot hurt the symbiotes, they're going to need lightning and magic at their side. Once Dylan has managed to free Doctor Strange and the Black Cat, he unleashes the full extent of his powers. All of the symbiotic goo in his vicinity explodes into 1,000 pieces. Once Doctor Strange and Felicia have been freed from the goo, the voice contacts them telepathically and downloads the entire battle plan in Doctor Strange's mind. Now that Doctor Strange knows what needs to be done, he takes Asgardian staff from Felicia and says, "Knull believes himself to be a god. Well, then two can play at that game." He stabs the staff into the earth and then transforms. Now that every chess piece is in place, the voice contacts the necessary heroes and tells them to get ready. The voice contacts Cyclops, the Invisible Woman, Human Torch, Doctor Strange, and Thor. Once in touch, the voice says, "On my mark." Cyclops removes his visor and unleashes his powers. The Invisible Woman creates a huge wave of force field and begins to push. Doctor Strange and Human Torch unleash their powers as well, and with this, 4 kinds of powers push in all the different directions from a crossroads in New York City, the city that was once engulfed. In the color red is now lit up by blue, orange, pink, and green. As this is happening, Knull's symbiote dragons begin flying away. The voice can't let this happen. They need to funnel them back into the city, and so it contacts Namor and says, "Namor, you're up." About damn time! Namor slams his trident into the earth and summons a huge tsunami. Spider-Man manages to narrowly avoid the tsunami, and Iron Man uses this opportunity to punch the Celestial into the ground. The voice then says, "We are clear. Storm, Thor, your turn." And with these words, Storm and Thor use their powers and electrocute all of the water. This hurts Knull severely because all of the symbiotic goo in the city has now almost been destroyed. The voice then commands Dylan to get out of there. But before the kid can move, Knull grabs him by the throat. "You think you can beat me? Wound me through my hive? You think you have won? Think again. You are alone. No one is coming to save you. Actually, this is where I come in." The voice then invades Knull's mind and he begins to scream out in pain. The darkness begins to boil away from his body, and we are then introduced to who the voice belongs to. It's Marvel Girl, and as she invades Knull's mind, she says, "Now let's see what makes you bleed." And Jean Grey begins to unravel his entire past. But what she discovers is not something pleasant. It's just cold, pitch-black darkness. She sees the time when Knull was attacked by the Sentinels, how he decapitated one of them and then used its head to craft his sword, how he bent the darkness to his will, how he has beaten everything over the years, fought and won every fight. She begins to get demoralized as she realizes that there is nothing they can use against Knull. But that is when Jean discovers what even Knull failed to notice. She says, "There is another, a reaction, an opposite, Knull, he is the god of abyss, but he's not the darkness. The darkness existed long before him, and with darkness there is light. It rose up against him. It bonded itself with warriors to rage against him, and these are the golden warriors that managed to stab Knull through the head eons ago. As Jean Grey continues to uncover the truth, we see Knull crawling away after he was stabbed in the head, but this is where Knull's memories end and the truth begins. As Jean continues to see the past, she uncovers the truth of what really happened back then. She says, "The light, it was young then, overwhelmed by the darkness. It was stretched too thin, and so it became something new. It would choose a single being in all of the universe and bond with them, make them better, make them powerful enough to stand against the darkness." This is when we see the power of light pull itself out of the Golden Warrior's body and then escape. When Marvel Girl sees this, she has finally realized the truth, that the power of light is a symbiote too. It is Knull's exact opposite. It is a god of light. But uncovering this truth has been too much for her. She is quite exhausted. She falls to her knees as Cyclops runs to her rescue. We then see the same sigil that was on the data disk and on the asphalt after Wraith's death. It is the sigil of the god of light. On her knees, Marvel Girl is unable to break off the connection. As she falls into Cyclops' arms, she says, "It's here. The god of light is here, trying to get in, but it can't. I can hear it screaming." We then see that a powerful beam of pure light is trying to penetrate the symbiotic dome around Earth, but it is failing. Jean involuntarily begins to cry, and when she opens her eyes, light is shining out of them. This is when Silver Surfer's voice echoes in her head. "Jean, worry not, I'm here." And we see that Silver Surfer has finally arrived on Earth. He reaches the point where the light is trying to get into the Earth, and then absorbs it into himself. Because Silver Surfer can penetrate the goo, he easily gets through the dome, and once inside, within a second, he hits Knull where it hurts the most. In an instant, Silver Surfer uses the power of light to stab through hundreds of dragons, and the Celestial still under the control of Knull. Knull screams out in shock, horror, and pain as he loses most of his army in a matter of a few seconds. But then, Silver Surfer comes to a sudden stop mid-assault. He looks down into his chest and watches the light emerge again. "Oh, I see. You are not here for me. Well, go then. Go and find your warrior." He lets the light go, and it whizzes its way through the streets of New York at incredible speeds. Back at the Fantastic Four lab, Mr. Fantastic has been watching everything unfold, and he now finally realizes what he has been missing all this while. Reed says, "Jean, these readings, it behaves just like a symbiote. You're right. This god of light. I know what it is. We all do. We've just been calling it by the wrong name. Captain Universe. Finally, I've solved the Enigma Force." And then, with a loud bang, the light enters the lab, and then into Eddie's body. Unconscious and still hooked onto medical equipment, Eddie rises up into the air like a messiah as the light surrounds him. Bright white light flashes out of his eyes. The god of light has finally found his warrior, and Eddie has finally found his symbiote. King in Black number 5, The Battle of the Two Kings. Silver Surfer expected a lot of things when he let the power of the light go, but he never expected to be the one making his final stand against Knull. But here he is right now, facing down the King of the Abyss. But he isn't going to back away from this fight, not again. And so, as Knull approaches him for a fight confidently, Silver Surfer kneels down and reaches into the power of his board. He taps into the undiscovered potential of his board and creates a sword out of it. A mysterious entity somewhere nearby can feel all of this going on. It can feel the emotions of the Silver Surfer. It can feel what is currently going through every superhero's mind. It can feel them losing hope and realizing that they might lose the fight. And yet, despite all of this, despite all the odds against them, it can feel them all taking the stand. But most of all, it can feel the Silver Surfer as he faces Knull. Wielding the large sword that he made out of his board, Silver Surfer faces Knull and says, "There is a new god of light now, so I have heard, but you, above all, should remember, no matter how fast light travels, darkness is always there, waiting." With these words, Knull summons his all-black necrosword. He expected Silver Surfer to be scared at the sight of his sword. He expected him to be weary, maybe a little taken aback, but he never expected the Silver Surfer to smile. Sadly, that is exactly what is happening right now. Silver Surfer is smiling as he faces down Knull, because unlike like him, Silver Surfer is not alone. And this is when a familiar voice echoes through the streets of New York. Avengers assemble! It's Captain America, and he's leading the charge with Storm, Invisible Woman, Iron Man, Cyclops, Wolverine, The Thing, Luke Cage, Blade, Miss Marvel, Iron Fist, and Marvel Girl. Captain America had expected all of them to die once he led this charge. He knew this was a suicide mission. They all did, but they had happily accepted fate. However, what they never expected was for a loud, bright explosion to stop them from ever reaching Knull. But that is what happens when they begin to close the distance between them and Knull. I appreciate the assist, fellas, but we will take it from here. Everyone is surprised by the sudden appearance of Eddie Brock, but the one who is most surprised is the one who Eddie has fought over the years and has slowly come to call as a close friend. Peter can't believe his eyes. He can't believe that Eddie is still alive. Not only that, he somehow still has the venom symbiote attached to him, but there is something different about him, about his entire being. His voice is different and so is his body. His hands are different as well. He now has claws for some reason, and his eyes are glowing. In fact, they are leaking light. As Spider-Man takes in all of this information, Eddie defiantly stands against Knull, who says, "So this is it then? The great god of light has chosen a host that I have killed. How many times now? Is this supposed to scare me? Honestly, you can't possibly believe that you can beat me." But before Knull has even uttered the last word, Eddie springs into action. He does not attack Knull. No, to do that, he will need a weapon, and a weapon he is going to create. Eddie raises his arms and summons Mjolnir and Silver Surfer's board, which is now a sword. As Eddie holds both of these weapons and faces down Knull, the light exuding from his body turns golden. His eyes and the symbol on his chest are now golden. It is as though Eddie's side quest is to surprise his fellow superheroes one by one, because right now, Thor and Silver Surfer are coming to terms with the fact that both of their legendary weapons that no one in the universe is supposed to be able to wield have just been summoned by Eddie Brock of all people. And contrary to Knull's statement, this is what scares him. This is what scares the god of the abyss, because this is something new, something he hasn't seen before, something he hasn't faced before. Surfer, Thor, Spider-Man, all of you, stay here. Protect the innocent. This series of events has been a barrage of the unthinkable, but what happens now is truly unfathomable. As Eddie says these words, he proceeds to combine the two legendary weapons. He proceeds to combine Thor's hammer and Silver Surfer's board. Even Knull's face is drowned out by the light this process produces. And once Eddie has combined the two weapons, he knows he is more than ready to face down the King of the Abyss. Knull had said that he had killed Eddie 2 times now, and Knull was right. This was the truth. But the truth had sparked something inside Eddie. Eddie had come to realize his truth. He had always failed in his life and got up once again, gotten up again and again to continue the fight. This is what he was known for. This is what he has always done. He is the comeback king. With this realization, and as the light from the process of combining the two weapons dies down, Eddie reveals what he has created. It is a glowing golden axe, and with the axe in his hand, Eddie lunges at Knull, and so this begins the much-awaited fight. The fight between Eddie Brock and Knull. The fight between good and evil. The fight between light and darkness. A saga for the eons that were and the ones that are about to come. Although Eddie had expected this to be a fierce fight, sadly, for him, it isn't a fight at all. Knull is fleeing the battle while throwing everything he can between him and Eddie. Back on the ground, Cyclops and the rest of the heroes are still recovering from the events that just occurred in front of their eyes. But Captain America snaps everyone out of their daze and orders them to keep a lookout. The fight isn't over yet. Knull still survives, and so do his symbiotes. But the god of the symbiotes, the king of the Black Abyss, is currently running away while being chased by Eddie Brock. The king of darkness, who is here to conquer all of creation, is now scared of Eddie Brock. He orders his symbiote dragons to step in between them while he uses the chance to flee the battle. Eddie knows that Knull is running away because he is scared. He is scared of what Eddie will do to him once he gets a hold of him. The symbiote dragons might have been a challenge before Eddie's transformation, but right now they are just minor inconveniences. Multiple dragons try to chomp down on Eddie, but he simply holds their jaws open while screaming for Knull to face him down like a man. But Eddie does not mind this entire debacle one bit. No, everything that is happening here, it's fun for Eddie, and Eddie is having fun after a long time. He uses his axe to cut down every symbiote dragon that stands in his way, and as the fight between the symbiote horde and the superheroes begins on the ground. So does the fight between the King of the Abyss and Eddie Brock up above. Knull has had enough. After all, he is the King of the Abyss. He isn't going to flee a battle like a puny mortal. He turns towards Eddie Brock and lunges at him while holding his all-black necrosword. You want your end, little host? Then let all black be your end. He tries to cut down Eddie with the sword, but Eddie simply holds it and stops the attack midway. He then disintegrates the sword with the power of light and says, "No, no more swords, no more dragons, just you and me." And Knull can't believe his eyes. The sword that he spent eons crafting, his first symbiote that he pulled out of his own shadow and perfected in the fire of the first celestial that he killed, was just atomized by Eddie Brock in an instant. But the battle is far from over. Eddie holds Knull by the throat and then crashes him through a nearby building. If Knull wants darkness, Eddie is going to give him that. Eddie is going to show him what darkness actually is. You wanted darkness, Knull? I hope you enjoy it, you son of a bitch. Eddie raises his axe, ready to strike down Knull, but that is when Knull says, "Heh, you know nothing of the darkness, Eddie Brock." And this is when the fallen celestial begins to rise again. The celestial that Tony thought he had defeated is now up, and its large hand is coming for Eddie. But what Knull has not realized yet is that everything is coming full circle, and this time he is not at the center of it. Eddie not only manages to escape the hand, but he lunges at the celestial and decapitates it. Just like Knull had eons ago, Eddie simply hovers in the air, watching the celestial's body fall down to the ground with a loud explosion. Eddie then looks at Knull and says, "You don't need to remind me what darkness is." He then launches himself at Knull once again, but this time he fails to notice the symbiote dragon headed straight for him. Thankfully, Spider-Man manages to save Eddie in the nick of time, as the friendly neighborhood superhero says, "Whoa, sorry, just so you know, fighting dragons over here. Man, I hate this symbiote stuff." Peter then gives Eddie a wide smile as he watches him hold Knull by the throat at the top of the Empire State Building. Eddie does not know how things have been coming full circle for Knull all this while, but this instance, this is a conscious one. He remembers how Knull killed him, stripped him off of the venom symbiote, and then threw him off the building. Eddie is going to do the same to him. Finally, Eddie stabs Knull in the chest with his new weapon and then strips him off of his symbiote armor. "Do you know what I remember the most when you threw me off of this building? I remember feeling hopeless, helpless. I remember falling." And with these words, Eddie does to Knull what Knull did to him. He throws him down from the Empire State Building. Down on the ground below, Thor and Iron Man are startled by the sudden arrival of Knull on the asphalt. They turn towards the sky, only to watch Eddie lunging at Knull. Knull knows his end is near, so he does the only thing that he can do to hurt Eddie. He begins to play mind games as he says, "You may kill me, but the darkness it lives on in your son." Knull's entire body is bruised and beaten. He is foaming blood from his mouth, and yet even in this instance, he can't help but be evil. As the fight between the symbiote horde and the superheroes rages on in the streets of New York, we see Eddie fly to the sky with Knull's body. "You want to talk about my son? Let's go talk." As Knull is hurled through the sky at incredible speeds, blood begins to leak out of his wounds. But this does not stop the King of the Abyss from spewing venom. "You will never be free of me. The void, and it is eternal. The darkness has teeth, child." "Yeah, so do we." Eddie bares his fangs as he continues to fly into space with Knull. The sheer speed of their travel has begun to melt Knull's face. Eddie tells Knull that he might be right, that the darkness will always exist, but so will light. We then see where Eddie is headed. He is headed straight for the sun. When he reaches the sun, he plunges straight into it with Knull. As he holds Knull by the throat for the last time, he says, "The darkness may be eternal. We might all be swallowed by it. We may all lose. We may all be consumed by the void, but I don't care. This is for Dylan." And then, with one final push with the help of the sun and the power of the god of the light, Eddie atomizes Knull once and for all. As Knull is now dead, Eddie can talk to Venom unimpeded. He cannot only hear Venom, but also all the other symbiotes. They are all free from the hive mind. Eddie watches the dome of the symbiotic goo fade away from the earth as he flies back towards it. However, things are quite different back on the surface of the earth. The vampires are rejoicing in their victory because with the symbiotes gone, they can finally take over the earth. Blade begins slicing through them one by one, but their sheer numbers overpower him. His face is pushed into the ground, but Blade does not care about it. And that is because he knows what time of day it is. It is morning. And as the dome of symbiotic synthetic goo fades away from the earth, sunlight begins to seep in, and then, in an instant, all of the vampires are vaporized. Thor and Silver Surfer stare at Eddie's fallen axe in awe. However, now that they know that their mission has been accomplished, they call their weapons back, and with a loud swish, Silver Surfer's board and Mjolnir separate from each other and return to the respective owners. But as Eddie reaches the surface of the earth, he knows that the toughest task of this entire battle still remains. He needs to take care of Dylan. He needs to take care of his son. He needs to take care of the darkness that resides inside him, the darkness that was passed on to Dylan by Eddie, a mistake that he has been repenting for all this while. When Eddie lands on Earth, he is congratulated by all his fellow superheroes. He takes a moment to thank them all, but knows that he has to find Dylan as soon as possible because Dylan is bound to be having a tough time now that Knull is dead. His worst nightmare comes true when he watches Dylan writhing in pain as he approaches him. His son plunges into his arms as soon as he realizes that his father isn't dead. Eddie asks Dylan to calm down, but his son tells him that a part of Knull still lives inside of him, and that part, it is hurting him. "I know, son. Try to breathe. This is going to hurt." With these words, Eddie uses the power of light and plunges his hand into his son's body. Dylan screams out in pain as it courses through his entire body, but the pain was only momentary because seconds later, Eddie had managed to pull out the piece of darkness that resided inside his son. Eddie then closes his fist and atomizes this last piece of darkness, this last remaining part of Knull, the god of light. Then finally speaks to Eddie as he leaves his body. He tells Eddie that their work together is done for now, and that Eddie has a new role to fulfill. As the symbiote of light is stripped away from Eddie's body, venom begins to take over him. Dylan is scared for his dad, but when he tries to approach Eddie, he is held back by Spider-Man. None of the heroes, not even Dylan, understands what is going on. But then, once the venom symbiote has bonded to Eddie, once again, Eddie says, "We are okay." He then sprouts wings and takes to the sky, just like Knull. Peter, who is befuddled by everything that is happening, says, "I don't understand. What is going on? Why are the symbiotes chasing him like that?" And that is when Dylan says, "I don't think they are." And Dylan is right. The symbiotes aren't chasing him. They are simply following their new king, the King in Black. The end. Marvelous verdict. The King in Black is an excellent conclusion to a story arc that we have been building up to for some time now. It manages to reignite the fight for the multiverse while offering a new arc for Eddie Brock and Venom. It might be a bit disappointing for some to realize that Dylan won't grow up to be a superhero like he was hinted at for so long, but nonetheless, the conclusion to his story arc is satisfying. After all, there are other ways of gaining superpowers in the Marvel multiverse. The art throughout the entire series has been fantastic, and the artists have managed to teeter the line between PG-13 and M ratings excellently whenever showcasing Knull. The overarching panels, blood, fangs, all lead to convey not only the battle of emotions being portrayed in the story, but also the ferocity and the threat that Knull poses to the entire creation. Overall, if you're looking to jump into the Venomverse, then King in Black is an excellent conclusion.